Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Zandi, the Chief Economist of Moody's Analytics, and I'm joined, as per usual, with my two co-hosts. We've got Cris. Cris is the Deputy Chief Economist, and Mr. Sweet, Ryan Sweet, Director of Real-Time Economics. Good to have you both. So how are you guys navigating Omicron? Is the family okay? Everyone in school, childcare, any disruptions due to Omicron?
No direct impact. Everyone is okay. No one's sick, but my wife's a family doctor, so she's pretty busy these days. So.
I can imagine.
Lots of cases.
Yeah. And you, Ryan, everyone in school?
Everyone's good. Everyone's healthy. The only issue we're running into is like getting tests, because any runny nose, any cough, you have to have a negative COVID test to send them back. So finding those things are kind of tricky, but other than that, we're all good.
So that means you can ring the cowbell with abandon today.
I can. Everyone's out of the house or either at school or, so.
And we have a guest, Elaine Buckberg. Elaine is the Chief Economist of General Motors, GM. Elaine, good to have you.
Terrific to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And I think you just scared her. You scared her with the cowbell.
I know. I'm sure she's wondering, what the heck is the cowbell all about? You want to explain, Ryan?
So in a little bit, we'll play this game where we try to guess the stat of the week. And when Mark gets it right, which is not very often, we ring a cowbell to celebrate.
I had a good week of like 10 weeks ago, I thought.
Yeah, when Cris was out, you were on a tear.
I was on a tear. Yeah. Yeah. So Elaine, this is a game we play just to make this work a little bit, obviously pretty geeky and all over the economic statistics, particularly Ryan. Ryan is really down and dirty with the statistics, but to make it a little more digestible for folks, we play this a bit of a game. And if you get, each of us give a statistic, the rest of the group tries to determine what that statistic is. And if we get it right, then we have in the past rung the cowbell. So this was, and listeners are really into the cowbell. They want to hear the cowbell. So we'll see how that goes. But Elaine, thank you so much for joining. And obviously, we're going to dive deep into what's going on in the vehicle industry. No better person to speak about that than you. How long have you been at GM? And can you give us just a general sense of how you got there? I'm really curious your path to becoming Chief Economist of GM.
I've been there for almost 4 years. It's been a great experience. The auto is really complex and therefore fascinating for an economist. And we're in all these both product markets, and we're also in factor markets, and globally. So it's really great as an economist. I've done a lot of different things, all in economics in my career. After my PhD, I started at the IMF. I was in the markets at Morgan Stanley as a currency strategist. I spent a bunch of microeconomic years in consulting at Nira and Brattle, but I also spent several years at the US Treasury Department from 2013 to 2016 as Deputy Assistant Secretary in Treasury's Office of Economic Policy. And I think that more than anything else really prepared me for the breadth of working at GM, although frankly, everything I've ever done comes to pair.
Who was Treasury Secretary when you were there?
Undersecretary Liu.
Who was Treasury Secretary?
Secretary Liu.
Oh, Liu. Sorry, I missed that. Sorry. Actually, I saw him the other night. I'm on a.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. I'm on a group. In a group that he belongs to that interfaces with Chinese economists and colleagues. It's it's the same group that sponsored the ping pong tournaments back in the 70s between the US and China that kind of opened up conversations. And he's a member of that group. So I just saw him was it last night or the night before last? Yeah. So great guy.
He's a great person.
Yeah, great, very nice fellow. And so you have such a varied, interesting background. And since you were a currency analyst, I got a question for you on that. That's been bothering me. Or
okay.
maybe it's just I've got this wrong, but my kind of cursory view of the currency landscape is that currencies, except for crypto, if you consider crypto a currency, other than crypto, currency markets have been very stable. I mean, shockingly stable, right? Given all the things that are going on in the world, the pandemic and, everything else, the US, and maybe I'm looking at this obviously as a prism of the US dollar, but US dollar, euro, US dollar, yen, US dollar, won, all seem like they're pretty stable. Has that come to mind? Has that struck you? Have you come to that same observation? Is that something that?
I mean, if you think about it more in terms of emerging market currencies versus the dollar, emerging market currencies versus advanced economy currencies. So rather than comparing the US dollar to the euro and the yen, compare the dollar and the euro and the yen to, a basket, including the Brazilian real and, the Mexican peso and so on. I think there have been really huge movements over the course of this. And if you looked at, if you go in your Bloomberg and do DXY currency GP and look at the trade weighted dollar, the fluctuations over the course of the pandemic have actually been pretty big. And there have been pretty massive swings in emerging market currencies as their safe haven flows to the dollar and to other currencies.
So in my mind's eye, I don't have it quite right, but against DM currencies and developed market currencies,
it's been more stable.
More stable.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly to you in the context of everything that's going on, I guess central bank policies have been pretty well coordinated. I mean, everyone's done the same thing. So maybe that's the reason why.
Right. I mean, US prospect, among advanced economies, the US was relatively early in getting to a large amount of vaccination. Our equity markets, as a result, have done disproportionately well. So that helps attract some capital flows. But, otherwise, it's not that surprising because they're certainly right now, advanced economies are way more similar to each other than they are to all of the economies that have had less vaccine access.
Okay.
Although the likes of Mexico and Brazil and so on, a lot of your middle income economies have caught up a lot on the vaccine access.
Great. Okay. So in my mind's eye, I need to go back and look a little closer. I'm sure I got it wrong.
I mean, I'm being very broad brush here.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Exactly.
I'm no longer catching the hour-to-hour movements in currency.
Which I'm sure was a lot of fun when you were doing it.
It was fun while you were doing it.
So do you have any great stories from Treasury? Like any things that are particularly memorable that you can share with us in terms of your
my
stint at Treasury?
My favorite memory is that I worked on the Build America infrastructure initiative, and on, I believe it was June 14th, I think, of 2015. President Obama made a big announcement around the initiative and some of the executive measures that were being taken to try to advance more use of private investment in infrastructure in a period where it had been really hard to get Congress to improve infrastructure funding. And he made this announcement in Delaware. And I and my team and others on the Treasury team had worked intensely on this especially with the White House and with US DOT. And I and two colleagues went with Secretary Lew to Delaware for this announcement, and seeing the president announce what you've been working on for really a year is pretty impactful. That was a very special moment.
Yeah, that's very cool. Very cool. Well, great. Well, thanks again for joining. Let's dive right into the statistics in the game. And it was a little light on statistics this week, I thought.
Very light.
Very light. So that makes the game a little trickier, I think. But let's give it a shot. And who wants to go first? You, Ryan, or Cris?
We're going to let Cris go first because it was a housing week, so we know where he's going.
We know what he's going to do. He's probably going to take my statistic. Go ahead, Cris.
All right, ready? 43.2 weeks.
Oh, that's all right. I got that one.
Right.
I knew you were going there.
I know, but it was a light week,
No, but it's
40
also good. It's a good
It's a
number.
good one, right?
Mhm.
So see,
relevant.
Elaine, how deep these guys are into the arcana of the data. It's got to do,
Definitely not.
just a hint. If it's Cris, it's probably housing.
Not this
Yeah, but
time.
it's definitely not average weeks a listing is on. So
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay, that can't
Think
be.
number of
autos.
consecutive weeks housing prices
Oh.
are up.
He went autos.
I'm sticking to the rules of the game here.
Yeah. Hey, this is a good number. This is a good one to talk about.
Is this about affordability?
It
Mhm.
is.
Oh, and is this the number of weeks of income people need to afford a new vehicle?
It is average price.
Oh,
new vehicle.
hey.
Yep.
Where's the
Cox.
cowbell, my
It's right
friend?
here.
Here.
Yeah, where's the cowbell?
Maybe
All
half a
job,
bell.
Mark.
Half a bell.
Yeah. Elaine, does that you probably knew that statistic. You probably know that by heart, that the 43 weeks. No?
I know it's around
Close to
there.
heart. Right, exactly. Well, we're definitely coming back
Yeah.
to that, right? Because we have to talk about these vehicle prices. I mean, they're
Yeah.
just
Yeah. So if we're not restricted to this week's data, 37.3%.
oh, that's your statistic. You're playing.
Oh,
Oh,
Oh, okay.
there we go.
Oh, wait a second.
Used car
37.
price, increasing used car prices.
Is that what it is, Elaine? It's the
Year
increase in
over
used
year,
car-
December over December.
Oh my gosh, we're really rocking and rolling.
we're on
here.
fire.
Is that the Manheim used car index? Or
No, that's CPI.
CPI.
Manheim's about 49.
Yeah.
oh, the CPI for
No, Manheim's
used.
a 45.9 year over year on the most recent reading. So the auction prices are up somewhat more than the retail market at this moment.
Right. So the Manheim index is a index based on auctions of used vehicles, and you're saying that's up 45,
The wholesale
50%.
auction, yeah,
something
it's,
like that.
it's
Yeah.
between 47 and 49 on the most recent reading.
Yeah. And in the used vehicle price that goes into the consumer price index, the CPI, which is, what most of us kind of focus
Is
on.
up 37.3% December over December.
Right.
Yeah, the
Right.
relative cost of a used vehicle to a new vehicle, controlling for content and quality, historically is around 1-to-1, as you'd expect, because there's some buyers who are going to substitute. Do you want to guess what the answer is about the relative price now? I'm changing the game a little.
This is the relative price of used cars to new
To new
cars,
cars.
quality controlled.
Quality and content controlled
And that's usually,
out of the CPI data.
and this is usually 1-for-1, as you would expect.
Historically, it's about one.
The
Almost exactly
market
one.
works, it prices.
Yeah. They're about
quality and
10% about 10% of buyers go into a purchase undecided between new and used, and they are effectively normally arbitraging away the difference.
Got it. So, and right now, I'd say used is 50% higher, 1.5 relative to new. I just guessing. Is that
Anyone else
you guys want to guess? You guys guess?
I'll go with
I was
two.
closer. Yeah, I was.
I'll go with 2.
2?
Yeah.
2 times. Wow.
Oh wow! I can't believe how high you're guessing. It's 21% higher.
All right.
But
Oh,
even
21%
so, like that's a
I went-
pretty.
I went
That
for the
strikes me
shock
as a
value,
huge gap.
so.
You guys might even shock you. More shocking.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we all have maybe personal anecdotes here. Like my dad, he sold his 3-year-old Toyota Camry with, I think, close to $35,000 mileage on it for more than he bought it 3 years ago. I mean, that's just wacko.
Crazy.
Yeah, Marcus wacko. But we're going to come back to
Yeah.
that because we got to dig.
But we can
deep
talk
into-
more about the healing of the markets and
Yeah,
stuff.
we'll come back to that in just a minute after we finish the game. But you played Elaine, you played the game admirably, I'd have to say. That
was
was
good.
well done. Well done. I don't know if it goes to cowbell status, but that was good. That was really good. Ryan, do you want to give me your statistic? Give us your statistic.
All right, I went with 9%.
9%.
I'm gonna warn you. This one's really hard, but it's really
Okay.
important.
Okay.
Automotive related or
No, it's not. It's
okay.
labor market related.
Labor
Economy,
market.
just yeah.
And it came out this week, you're saying.
It did.
UI claims related?
Nope.
By the way, UI claims are up a lot, right?
Yep.
Well, this kind of explains why.
Oh, say it again. 9.2%.
Oh, no, just 9%.
9%.
Highest since January 2021.
Okay, so this has got to be number of sick people, something related with sick Omicron people, folks that are
It's
sick
related
with
to Omicron.
It's related to Omicron.
Absenteeism?
Nope.
It's a household pulse.
It is, Chris. You're getting closer.
Okay, getting there. All
That
right.
that survey is just a treasure trove of
It
It
is.
interesting
It
data.
is. I hope it
Is
never
that
ends.
it's not the percent of the labor force. Oh, yes, it is. It's the percent of the labor force that's not working because they're sick, taking care of a sick person, or fearful of getting sick.
That's an excellent guess, but that's not it.
No.
That was a good one though. But all right, while we're on that number, I
Yeah.
think it was over 8 million people in the latest survey, and it's weekly, that were not at work because of either they were sick or caring for someone that is sick. So we're setting up for a doozy of a January employment number.
Yeah. Hey, wait a second. This is the time for me to say at Mark
There we go.
Zandy.
There we go. Never fails.
Yeah, Elaine. So I got my Twitter handle 10 years ago, never used it. 2 months ago, I said, okay, I'm going to start using this thing because everyone's telling me I should use this thing. And it's at Mark Zandy. So every chance I get, I plug it. Not that it helps any, but I plug it. Are you on Twitter? Are you on Twitter? Elaine?
I am, but I'm a reader, not a tweeter.
You're not a tweeter. Okay. All right. So I did tweet out this morning. I looked at that data, the Pulse survey data, and you're right. It's a treasure trove that the census has been doing the survey intermittently. Early on they were doing it almost weekly, but now it's intermittent every few weeks. The last survey goes through January 10th, and here's 12 million people that are not work. So that one of the set of the questions they ask is, if you're not working, why aren't you working? Because this goes to the labor shortages. And almost on the nose, 12 million people said they're not working because they're sick, they're taking care of a sick person, or fearful of getting sick. And at the peak of Delta, just to give you context, it was 8 million. So you're absolutely right. And you're saying this, and this was the survey week for the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
It was. Yep. Last week.
Employment report, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying because there's so many people not working because they're sick or fearful of getting sick, that's going to mean. So are you expect January employment could decline?
It could decline.
Yeah, right.
And this number, the 9%, also gets to why jobless claims are up to 286,000.
Oh yeah, we got to go back to 9%. So the 9%, I don't know what that is.
All right,
Chris,
I won't make you guys suffer. It is
okay.
9% of small businesses in restaurants closed temporarily last week, or in the survey week for the Pulse survey.
Of course. Yeah.
How did I not get that?
It was a light week for numbers.
Oh, come on.
That's an important number.
Hold on. Wait. What was the number again? 9% of what?
Small businesses in restaurants, small businesses in restaurants and accommodations closed temporarily.
Oh, I didn't even know that data is in the Pulse survey.
Mm-hmm. So it's the highest since January of last year.
Hold it. So you can look at data across company size. I did not know that. Huh.
I'm here to educate.
That is really good to know.
Yeah, it's fascinating data.
Right.
Yeah. Anything else that stand out from that company size? What about pricing? Do they have any data on? Oh, well, I can't imagine they'd ask that.
No, I don't think they have.
Yeah. Right. Oh, that's pretty cool. I have to.
Yeah, but I always go to that
That is
and the labor market questions.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I use it. As you say, it's an incredible data set.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just telling the Commerce Department that they got to keep doing this, even after the pandemic is over. They don't need to do it every 2 weeks, but please, maybe once a quarter would be nice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really gives you a nice window into what's going on in the world. But that's pretty cool. Okay. Anything else on that, Ryan, you want to bring up?
Once a month, please.
Well, you go for once a month? Okay.
Yeah.
Would you pay for it, Elaine? Would GM ante up No, I'm kidding.
I don't know if we've ever paid for any special questions.
I know.
So
That's what I said to the
I'm setting
commerce
new
guys. I
precedents.
said,
I have no idea how much it costs, so I'm gonna hold on that one.
yeah, I said to them, look, because I have no budget constraint, could you please do this for me? Yeah, that would be really, really valuable. Okay, you want my statistic?
Yeah. Back to normal index. Here we come.
No, I'm not
All
going to
right.
do that one.
91.
Which we can talk about, by the way. We probably should talk about, but here's the number: 1.52 million. 1.52 million. It
All right,
is a statistic that came out this week.
So it's housing starts related.
Yes, it is.
All right.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, how did you jump right from 1.52 million to those housing starts related? That's how your mind works. It just like
I don't know
goes
how it works, but yeah, when I hear 1.5, yeah, no, I mean,
That's single family? No, that's
No, single family was almost 2 million.
yeah.
That was
1 point.
starts in the
No.
month. We're talking single family housing starts in the month of December was, I think it was 1.17, I think, or something like that, pretty
Mhm.
close to that. Yeah. But no, I'm
Yeah, they came out a little bit better.
1.52 million. This is housing starts related. This is for the month of December. It was a pretty solid report. We got 1.7 million starts in the month, and that feels like
Total.
where we are now, 1.7 million. Didn't we have some kind of bet around housing starts or
We
something?
do. It's still
And wasn't I
ongoing.
right? Didn't I say
You
one
are
point?
still wrong.
I'm still wrong.
You
Couldn't be
said
more wrong.
1.7 million average over 2021 and 2022. So we got to get a boatload of starts here. to
Oh no,
get it.
no, I'm going to be right. We're at 1.7 million halfway through, so you just do the arithmetic. No,
So we're
You don't
going to okay. Well, we're going
No.
to 1.8, 1.9. All right.
no. I'll stick with
see.
the 1.7. I'll stick with the 1.7. But we will be much higher than this by the end of the year.
But you need average. You need average.
yeah.
I think this
Average
is a
1.7.
I'm going to claim a victory here. No,
I think it's a little premature.
Okay.
All right. So what was it? 1.
5.2 million. This goes
I
to
should
my
know this.
point, huh?
Oh, to support your forecast. So it's got to be
Well-
starts under construction.
Yes.
All right.
Beautiful. It's housing starts that are in the pipeline, headed towards completion. It is the highest it's ever been since the early 70s, and it's still rising, very quickly. I mean, obviously, this goes to the global supply chain issues, building materials. It goes to labor supply issues, construction trades, that kind of thing. Builders can't get things that they've started across the finish line into completion, so it's building up in the pipeline. But there is a lot of property in the pipeline.
Mhm.
Just think about that for a second. 1.52 million starts or homes that are in the pipeline. That's about a year's supply at the current rate, right? We're at 1.7, but pretty close. And that 1.5 million, by the way, is our estimate, at least my estimate of the undersupply in the market today in terms of affordable housing. So it just feels like we're going to get a lot of supply here. And by the way, a lot of that's on the multifamily side. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
kind of
Yep.
noticed this, but multifamily is gangbusters. I mean, 550,000, that's really high by any historical standard. So we're all kind of hand wringing about rents, and rent's going to go into CPI rent and add to inflation. And I think that's all true, but I think that's a 22 event. As we get into 23 and 24, we're going to start seeing vacancy rates start to rise. And I think rent growth is going to come off pretty quickly at that point.
Mhm.
It's going
Yeah.
there's a long lag, but it's going to come off at that point. Anyway, that's
a good
great.
number.
That's a
good
good,
number.
right? A good
That's a good
That was
number.
a good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good number. Elaine, they never give me a compliment. They never give me a compliment. So that's
Well,
really,
you would get one if you had good numbers.
see, see, now we're back to what the way this
Yeah.
is typically what happens. And Elaine, I'm the chief economist too. And look what's happened. Look at how I'm treated.
You've obviously created a environment where your staff can express their views, feel free to disagree, that their leaders open to new ideas. You're an excellent leader.
That's one way of looking at it, I guess. Jeez Louise.
And also, you and I have been working together for 17 years. So at some point,
I know it's got to be it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Got to be
Well,
it.
talk-
Well,
I think you should talk about the back to normal index though.
really? Okay.
Yeah, it's 91.2.
Yeah.
Okay, so Elaine, we put together this back to normal, the so-called back to normal index. We've been doing it since the pandemic. It's a compilation of government statistics, third-party data, everything from TSA, number of people going through TSA checkpoints, to open table, to, a lot of different statistics. It's daily data. We index it to equal 100 as of February 29th, 2020, like, right before the pandemic.
Right.
100 would be, we're back to normal.
Totally back to normal.
And interestingly, if you go back before Thanksgiving, we were 96%, 98%. We're now back down to 91%. And that's Omicron. And, shows us how, painful this is. It's really crimping our economy's growth.
How about Florida? Is Florida?
It's down? Everywhere's down. I think Florida less down. I mean, it's really mostly down in the areas like New York and PA and Chicago, Illinois, those areas that have been hit hard by Omicron.
Florida's at 97.4.
Yeah. So it was over 100, I think.
It was.
Yeah, it was over 100, but it's back down again.
It would be interesting to know whether the correlation is greater with the number of infections, or sort of how tight or loose restrictions ever were in that place, where I think voluntary behavior has followed the path set by the initial restrictions in terms of just sort of peer pressure and standard setting.
Well, there is a very clear inverse relationship between the BNI index, back normal index, and infections. So, by state. So if you just do a scatter plot of states, more infections, per whatever 100 per 1,000 people, you can see the BNI is the lower in those areas. So it's pretty clear that the Omicron is now doing a fair amount of damage. Hey, Ryan, since I have you, and I know your favorite statistic is the 10-year Treasury yield. And of course, that has moved in a pretty big way. I noticed back down today, we're down to 1.75%. We had been close to 1.9, but we're up a lot from where we were just, a few weeks ago. And I know you do this decomposition of the 10-year Treasury yield into different parts, components of the yield. What's driving this increase that we're observing now? What's going on?
So the two main things are higher inflation expectations, which are just following oil prices higher, and then an increase in the term premium. So the term premium is the extra compensation investors need to hold long-term treasuries versus short-term, and that's gone up. And gets back to the Fed signaling that they're going to wind down and end the tapering process in March, and then shortly after the first rate hike, start shrinking the balance sheet. So the term premium is starting to go back up closer to zero.
Oh, is it really? It's that far? It's back up close to zero. I didn't realize.
Oh, we're moving in that direction.
Moving in that direction. Well, here's so there's you decompose 10-year yields into inflation expectations.
Correct.
And they've moved up, but they're still, I think, consistent with Fed target, right? They're just over 2%. Yeah. And then you said term premium, and then the third is real short-term interest rates. So short-term interest rates after inflation. Have they moved?
They're really
at all?
negative. No, not too much.
Explain this to me. I don't get it. I mean, the Fed's saying I'm going to start normalizing, I'm going to step on the brakes. They're saying, I guess the market is saying, I don't believe you, Fed. You're never going to be able to raise rates like you say you're going to raise rates. Is that what's going on? I don't get it.
No, the market's bought in. I mean, if you look at Fed funds futures, they fully priced in a full percentage points of rate hikes this year.
Okay. Yeah, but I guess the terminal rate is lower, right?
Yeah. The market's view of the terminal rate is lower than ours.
So we and the Fed say, when I say the Fed, the members of the FOMC who produce a forecast every quarter say, in the long run, as we get back to full employment, inflation back to target, the federal funds rate target should be 2.5%. And that's consistent with what we've been saying.
That's our forecast, right?
And the market is saying, investors are saying, no, it's like a point below that or something.
Correct.
Right? And I think that's the difference, isn't it? That's why we're not, but I just don't understand. So I guess investors just don't believe the Fed can get us back to anything normal.
Closer to,
so
I think the market is saying, we believe you that you're going to raise the rates this year, but we don't think you're going to be able to get as high as you think you will in the long run.
Yeah. Interesting.
It also suggests, though, that seems to be a signal of long-term inflation expectations coming down really low. Otherwise, that's a negative real rate.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
If you look at like inflation swap curves, the market's buying into the idea that inflation is going to come back down to where it was,
Yeah.
pre-pandemic. So we're not in this new inflation regime.
No. Okay. Okay. Well, that was great. I think we should move on and dig into the big topic, which is the, obviously the vehicle industry, and a lot of things we want to cover here: electric vehicles, and maybe a little around autonomous cars. We'll get to that, but top of mind has got to be those vehicle prices we were talking about earlier, because they are a big contributor to the acceleration in overall inflation. And just to kind of frame this, consumer price inflation, CPI inflation, is 7%. That's year over year through the month of December. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe about 25% of the acceleration in inflation is directly related to the exponential increase in vehicle prices, over the past year. Is that roughly right? Do you know, Elaine or
I haven't
Ryan?
calculated it that way,
Yeah.
but that's generally right? It's been
Yeah.
a really big contributor. And frankly, in third quarter GDP, the slowdowns in production at that time, which we can talk about, and how things have improved, were also the single largest drag on GDP. So the chip crisis and its repercussions for production, inventory, sales, and the feedback effects in the used car market have been very important, both for inflation and GDP.
So that's fundamentally what's going on here. The prices are going up because vehicle manufacturers like GM can't produce enough cars, and that goes directly back to the chip industry and the shortages in the chip industry.
In general, that's right, but I would say that there have been real improvements in chip supply and production now compared to really the worst of it was the third quarter. So I can start digging in here if you'd like.
Yeah. No, I'm really
story.
Yeah, what's going on? Yeah.
So a little over a year ago was when issues really first started arising about chip supply into the auto market, and that could be a production constraint in 2021. Frankly, it was a more complicated problem because the pandemic exacerbated. So fundamentally, you have a structural problem where both consumer electronics and vehicles are increasingly chip intensive.
Mm-hmm.
And for vehicles, one way you think about it is there's all this desired technology that people want in their vehicles. They want to buy a vehicle that has side blind spot alert and front end collision prevention. And they want to buy a truck with 360-degree cameras so they can park and trailer it well. And they want a computer screen like dashboard. And so all of this increases chip
Only
content in
Cris
vehicles.
Dorides wants that.
No.
Yeah.
In
The
fact,
crypto king. Yeah.
in fact, we actually think that over the next few years, the chip content in our vehicles will literally be doubling. At the same time, similar things are happening in consumer electronics, and a newer top-end smartphone has about twice as much chip content as one a couple of years ago or a generation before. Take all of that, and then you have some production disruptions due to lockdowns in 2020 and a huge increase in consumer electronics demand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the start of the problems that chip makers had difficulty serving all of their demand with these sudden changes during the pandemic. And then over the course of the year, there were additional disruptions to a stress system. So there was the Texas deep freeze that caused some Texas-based chip suppliers to have to take their plants down and not really get back to full production for months because it's very delicate stuff. So it's not like shutting down your computer and turning it back on 15 seconds later. And then there was a fire at a major chip maker for auto in Japan. And then perhaps most severely of all In the late summer, the Delta wave that hit Malaysia and some other Southeast Asian countries and resulted in complete shutdowns of plants for some period and then operating at limited capacity really put stress on virtually every automaker in terms of their ability to supply the set of chips that would go into vehicles for vehicle production, and caused a lot of plant downtime across the globe and across automakers, which is really what hurt that third quarter production in the US and around the globe, and made the market especially tight in the fourth quarter. And it's important to keep in mind that in order to make a vehicle, you need a set of chips, a set of distinct chips. And that's one of the challenges. So when you've got a stressed system and you've got stress all over the place, it becomes harder to handle the next impact. However, I will say that things have improved considerably in the fourth quarter.
Before you go on to the improvement, because I'd love to hear about that. But so it feels like there's a lot of obviously moving parts here and lots of reasons for, the shortage of chips and the impact on production and on prices. But it feels like you kind of landed at the most important reason, and that's the Delta wave and the damage it did to Asia. And you mentioned Southeast Asia. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, and in particular, the worst of the problems really happened in the late summer and in Malaysia in particular, where many chips passed through. The government completely shut production at chip plants for a couple weeks roughly, and then held it at 60% capacity. But Malaysia, can I give credit to Malaysia? They did an astounding job on vaccinations. So they went from like 5% vaccinated in about July 1 to when they fully reopened the economy in some point in October, they were at 90% vaccination. So they just did an incredible job. And frankly, through I don't know whether it's Gavi or what organization, but vaccines got to that country and got prioritized to that country.
Yeah.
So that
I tell this story, and I think it's this anecdote, and I know it's another automaker, but the F-150, which is obviously a very important, I think it's maybe the best seller, I don't know, in the US. It's a Ford, obviously. That relies on chips coming from two Malaysian chip plants, and largely, and those chip plants were just shut down. The Malaysians, because they weren't vaccinated and they were scared by the Delta wave and what it was doing, shut things down, and that really disrupted F-150 production, and obviously no inventory and higher prices. Is that
I'm sure that the F-150 relies on chips that come from many places.
Yeah,
but I'm sure that those were critical chips without which they couldn't make a vehicle, or they couldn't even nearly make the vehicle with the intention to retrofit it. And that's when you take downtime.
Yeah.
But the situation.
I want to go, before you go there, one more question, just to press you a little bit, to take it a little broader to the impact on inflation that we're observing now. There's this raging debate, in the economics community as to what's behind the higher inflation. Is it demand or supply? And obviously, that simplifies things enormously. It's both demand and supply. And here's how I characterize it, and I just want to get your reaction to it. Although I'm scared after you told me that currency movements, I'm wrong about currency movements. So tell me about, I'm a little nervous, but here's how I characterize it. About a year ago, inflation started to really pick up. And that was primarily a demand side phenomena. Vaccine rollout, reopening, businesses that had slashed prices during the pandemic, think hotels, think rental cars, they just normalized prices. And that is a one-time bump to inflation. Then you had the American Rescue Plan. That was the stimulus support, almost $2 trillion back in March of last year. That really juiced up demand significantly. And so that added to inflation. But at that point, the run-up in inflation wasn't really kind of top of mind. It wasn't in the kind of normal discourse. It was almost a feature, not a bug, because the Fed had been working hard to get inflation up, and here we finally got inflation up to a place where we might feel more comfortable with, and we felt like it was going to come back in as the demand support faded, and it's already fading. But then the thing that really was a surprise was Delta. We thought the pandemic was, I was hoping it was over, And, the administration was saying, go enjoy July 4th. But the Delta wave was already in train, and that really did a lot of damage to labor markets. People got sick, and most importantly, to supply chains, going back to what we just talked about in Malaysia and the chips and the vehicle industry. So the inflation problem that we're observing now that has made it top of mind is supply. It's the supply side effects of the pandemic, and that's evident in labor markets and global supply chains. Okay, I'll stop. What do you think of that kind of narrative?
So first of all, in terms of bringing inflation down, not just in auto, but across the economy, I think it's all about resolving supply chain issues, and that you can bring down in large parts of the economy that have particularly contributed to inflation, especially goods. You can bring down inflation, or in some cases, even see prices reverse. Even if you're still going to have some upward pressure associated with higher wages, especially at the lower end of the spectrum and hitting services. With respect specifically to auto, of course, it's a supply-demand mismatch, but I think especially later in the year, the hits are really coming from supply side. So you had fundamentally strong demand conditions, and frankly, you went into 2021 with low inventories. Yep. So just look back at 2020 for a second. You lose 24% of US auto production days due to lockdowns. Demand is down 15% for the year. So already your inventory shrunk by the time you finished 2020, and there was a real premium placed on private transportation because versus public transportation. Yep. And you had people moving out of cities to places where they might need to rely on vehicles more. So that's what you go into the year with. And then you have strong fundamental demand conditions, especially as you have stimulus checks, you have lots of savings. I mean, think about just the 2021 stimulus payments that went to 85 to 90% of households. Family of four, $8,000. If you're a household that hasn't been hit financially by the pandemic, that's a big windfall that could be spent on something not so easy necessarily to spend it on some of the services you used to spend, but you can spend it on a vehicle. So and in addition, ample jobs, the optimism of vaccination. So lots of reasons for really fundamentally strong demand conditions. So I would have been forecasting record sales, but for supply constraints.
Yeah.
So then you have these supply constraints, and it's like it's a crisis with multiple waves. And you've had these, there are always shocks to the auto supply chain, which is very complex. But this was a lot of shocks to one particular part of the supply chain, which each one, as the system becomes more stressed, is harder to take. So yeah, I think that's a supply constraint. As the bigger consideration, and certainly that's the consideration later in the year, as you had more plant downtime in the third quarter and early in the fourth quarter associated with the Delta wave and supply chain issues than you had earlier. And that's when your inventories really got to about 1.1, 1.2 million. Many dealer lots are empty, and prices started ramping up more on the consumer side. And that's a combination of, you've got this constrained supply, you have lower incentives, you have dealers taking more price. So incentives come from the automakers, dealers also taking more price, and basically vehicles being pre-sold before they hit the dealer lot. Yeah, and not a lot of ability to substitute into the used vehicle market, especially because if fewer vehicles are being sold, fewer vehicles are being traded in and moving, those near new vehicles moving into that used vehicle market. But I do want to talk about, I want you to let me get to talking about the future.
Yeah. So it feels like you're going to give us a more upbeat kind of picture here. So yeah, fire away. Please do.
Yeah.
Go
So,
ahead.
I mean, chip supply has improved. All the automakers have been working on this, and we haven't had a new wave of problems. And the fact that there's more widespread vaccination around the globe, and also more people have been exposed to the virus reduce the odds of future lockdowns or their severity. So chip supply improved in the fourth quarter. It has improved more in the first quarter. The outlook for this year is better. Still some fluidity, but definitely the outlook's better. At GM, we have all of our North American plants, but for one, operating on normal schedules. We're doing weekend overtime at many of them, including our full-size truck and SUV plants. We're adding shifts back in 2 plants. And then when I look across automakers, there's only one that I'm aware of that has plant downtime announced in North America for something related to supply chain versus normal vehicle transitions or something at the moment. So it's a much better outlook.
So typically pre-pandemic, we were selling and presumably globally producing 17 million units. This is new light vehicles. We were there, up through April, May of 2021, and then it collapsed because of the supply shortages we have and all the things you described. In December, we were down to 12.4 million, I believe. I think that was the last I looked. Are you saying now that we are producing pretty close to a level that we can now start selling again 17 million units at least? Because we're back to typical, except for a few cases, we're back to kind of typical production levels. Does that sound right?
I think we're close.
We're close.
I think we're close.
I mean, of course, we won't build inventory.
Much closer.
With that.
Yeah. Much closer to that typical level of recent years of 17 million.
Okay. So we're going to see, I feel like globally, I can see auto production picking up in many parts of the world. And so you're saying in the next few months, we should start to see vehicle sale units kind of normalize, starting to get back to that kind of 17 million unit pace.
Right. I think, again, inventories super low. Many dealers have bare lots. So it's really the throughput from plants or coming off, to the extent that vehicles are being sold in New York or imported. It's that throughput that is determining sales. And they're pretty much selling immediately, never been faster turn rates. So production's higher, sales will be higher.
Cool.
And that also should mean that even if inventories were to flatline and every new vehicle made were to be sold on net, that should take pressure off new vehicle prices.
Right. So do you think this is enough to bring prices down?
Inflation.
Yeah. Do you think it brings prices down, or do you think it just stabilizes prices? Do we need inventory to increase before prices come in?
It's ultimately a lot of that is about the competitive dynamics.
Okay.
Right. So not only are automakers like GM deciding the incentives that we offer into the market, which are effectively discounts off a vehicle, sold by one of our dealers, those are, calibrated on very high frequency. Right. So competitive dynamics can affect that. And even more so, competitive dynamics will affect where dealers want to sell vehicles. So JD Power does put out statistics on dealer markup over dealer cost. And the historical norm is about 1%. And the latest readings are 9%. Right. So they have the capacity to negotiate that based on immediate competitive conditions. And when I talk to dealers, they say, when you ask me, it's like, well, it depends on the inventory of the guy across the street who's selling, one. They'll be very, subtly and continuously reactive to changing competitive conditions. It's also worth looking at the ratio of ATP, or average transaction price, to MSRP, or manufactured suggested retail price. And historical norm, going back, if you went back the 5 years before the pandemic, is 85%. So effectively a 15% discount off MSRP. At the moment, 100.1.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a big move up. That's compression of incentives, but also dealers pricing differently in relation to their cost.
Got it. Does the industry have the capability to reasonably increase production over that 17 million unit pace? I mean, can can the industry do that, or is that pretty
In
much?
general, yes.
Yes.
But
Okay.
does the chip supply currently allow that? I
Okay.
think not.
But
Not
if all
in,
the dynamics
I don't think
hold,
that in 2022.
not in 2022. Okay. Okay.
But there
got
are
it.
things that we're doing. I mean, so at GM, we've been really changing the nature of how we are acquiring the chips for our vehicles. And for example, we had a big announcement back in late November, early December about microprocessor units, which are one kind of chip. And we have gone directly into the design and are working with chip makers to manufacture those chips. And we are reducing by 95% the number of unique different microcontrollers that go into our vehicles. So much more standardization across vehicles, working directly with 7 chip makers on that design and manufacture, and actually much, more substitutability, more stability over time, and a lot less engineering. So a lot of efficiencies. And we're carrying this across, this approach across other kinds of chips. And other automakers have made similar announcements to really de-risk our own supply chain.
Makes sense.
And again, I talked about that needing the right set of chips to go into your vehicles. This helps with that.
Got it.
Risk.
So you're saying going forward, we're going to be in a much better spot if we ever get into another scrape, whatever's going to cause that. Yeah. One other question, and I do want to get to EVs in just a minute, but this is very, very helpful. Pent-up demand. So, there's demand. It couldn't be satisfied because there was no supply. So if we're at 17 million, let's just say that's revealed demand. That's what we should be getting. We're down to 12.4 in December. You do a little bit of arithmetic. That's about 1.5 million units that cars that have not been sold that could have sell. So that presumably that's what I would call pent up demand. Those consumers will buy it when they can get it at a reasonable price. So it's 1.5 million. That's a lot of cars.
And that's not enough because you got to be looking at pent up demand from last year.
Oh, I didn't even look at 2020. I was just looking at 2021.
So the accumulated pent up demand
exactly.
is in the low single digit millions. It's north of 2.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I just did this quickly before we got on, and I didn't even think about 2020. But you're right because the pandemic, right?
So we're going.
So you're saying it's 2-3 million, something like that. Yeah, I'm not want to pin you down.
I imagine a little higher there.
Oh, geez. Okay. All right. Okay.
So there's a lot of pent up demand, and that'll be released as vehicles come available. And it's worth keeping in mind that, our survey evidence, we've got a great market research team who runs questions for me. Our survey incidence tells that people buy a new vehicle, for a variety of reasons. They want the latest safety technology. They like to have something new, or they get to some place where they say either I've got enough miles that I'm concerned about the risk of more maintenance, or, the maintenance time and costs have gotten so high. So people do want to replace their vehicles, and they're driving again. So they may have put on less mileage in some cases in 2020, but since about July, August, if you look at, for example, gas sold, it's right in the heart of the normal historical range. And so people are moving around just as much as normal, maybe with some different patterns behind those. But people are using their vehicles and they're going to want to replace them. And when supply improves, pricing improves, or they just decide, I don't feel like waiting any longer, I'm going to put in my custom order, they will be buying vehicles.
Yeah. We've got this.
So that's been a couple years of pent up demand, I think, to satisfy.
Yeah, I need you to talk to my auto guy. We got this really good auto analyst, Mike Brisson. I don't know if you've met Mike, but he's really very good.
Oh, I thought you were asking for a discount on a GM vehicle, Mark. I mean, I'd be happy to.
Yeah. Well, I debate him all the time, and he comes back and he's about pent up demand in the vehicle industry. And I say, look, if we're below 17 million units, that's got to come back in some point down the road. We could talk about when, but that's got to come back. And he comes back and he says to me, look, and this probably applies to the 2020 kind of stock, the pent-up demand we measure there, that people weren't driving, right? So you weren't depreciating your car. Like I lease my cars, and I leased a car right before the pandemic, and I barely drive it anyway, but I didn't drive it at all. And so I didn't, what do I do? Do I, with that? So does that resonate with you?
So first of all, I mean, Mark, I'll just be more forthcoming. I think
Yeah.
pent-up demand going into this year is on the order of 4 million units going into the year.
Okay.
Wow.
Mike,
And I
you
don't
hear
think
this,
that production, I don't think production will, again, great improvements in the chip situation, although still fluid, but it's not going to meet it. My supply constraint forecast is not going to meet what might be my fundamental demand forecast. So you're going to exit the year with even more pent-up demand. And again, new appreciation for having a vehicle for safe transportation. That kind of sense is not going to completely vanish. People have changed their geography in ways that with more people living in the suburbs, they're more likely to need a bigger household fleet, whether it's going from 0 to 1 or 1 to 2 or whatever it is. And they've developed new habits like liking to camp and boat and things that may require them to have more vehicles. And maybe they've figured out that actually driving, on that trip versus flying, they've decided it's a better way to go.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, I don't think that demand has changed. And again, I think also in terms of privately owned vehicles versus shared transportation, whether it's ride hailing or taking the subway, I think that there's, going to be a permanent preference shift to having a vehicle, even if sometimes you're using still shared transportation.
You convinced me. We got to talk to Brisson. We've got very strong new vehicle forecast, but I suspect it's not strong enough based on this conversation. But let's talk about electric vehicles. And I'm not sure how to start this conversation. Maybe Cris, Ryan, is there some way you want to ask this question around EVs?
So I was thinking about, so if we in fact do have 4 million units of pent-up demand, so very strong pent-up demand, is that still in the ICE, in the internal combustion engine, or is that shifted, or have preferences shifted at the same time that we've had this pandemic experience? So yeah, there's a lot of demand out there, but maybe it's more demand for.
So we have about a doubling of EV sales as a percentage of sales between 2020, where it was under 2%, to, not sure I have a final number for 2021 yet, but more like 3.5% is about where I'd expect it to land. And when the sales actually happen and how much they're deferred will determine to what extent they're ICE or EV vehicles. And the thing that's really changing is the number of vehicles that are available in the market, with many new EVs coming to the market and in a more diverse set, so everyone's preferences can be fit, and that the EVs that are coming to market are increasingly more complete substitutes for an ICE vehicle, especially in terms of having more, as battery costs have come down. We at GM and other automakers can put more battery into an EV, and that means it can have a longer range. And it also means that we can bring out vehicles that serve a wider set of preference. So I proudly own a Chevrolet Bolt and love to drive it. And it's great for me, my husband, and my small dog, right? But if I were going on a road trip, 15 hours to Florida with a family of 5, wouldn't be a good fit, right? So there you want an SUV, right? We've got the Hummer SUV coming. We've got the Blazer coming in a few years, the E-Blazer. Or you want a pickup truck as a style statement or a functional statement. And you'll be able to buy an EV Hummer or an electric Silverado in the coming years. So again, the more they're deferred, the more the number of models coming to market, especially mainstream models, is doubling every couple years at this point. And so again, fitting all sets of preferences at the same time that the average range is going up. And in general, we find in our market research that when you give people 300 miles of range, they sort of say, okay, I'm good. That'll serve all my needs, and I'm comfortable with that. And I'm happy to talk more also about, charging, but all the things are driving towards continued shift of consumer preferences towards EVs, which we see dramatically happening in our market research, and also a continued shift in the supply to meet those preferences.
Right. So if that's the case, the 17 million number which is overall may not tell the real story, right? If suddenly there's more demand for those electric vehicles and supply is still constrained because capacity is not up to the level, right? That you're still ramping up, you said, you have new models coming out in the future. Could we see price pressures continue, right? Because demand is still going to outstrip the supply
So
on
I mean, basically what you're saying is, would pricing on EVs go up?
if in fact the demand is shifted.
Right, but the demand is there
that's
when
my
you
question.
find the right, for the right product. If for example, we've got a multi-year wait list on the Hummer EV. So, okay, there won't be, if you want to buy a Hummer EV, you're not probably getting incentives on it, but the supply is also small, so it's not going to have a big impact on the CPI. Now, the big thing is whether and when we get the EV tax credit that's in, what has been the Build Back Better package, with maybe in some smaller package. I don't know whether what name that will have, but the EV tax credit, as in the most recent versions of the bill, $7,500 base credit, another $500 if the battery's made in the US, $4,500 more if it's US and union made, as well as credits for used vehicles and commercial purchase of vehicles. This is a game changer, and out through the end of 2031. So this is a big game changer in terms of the relative cost of an internal combustion engine vehicle to an EV vehicle, and compressing that price differential is like number one on the list of what consumers tell us that they want and would make them convert to an EV.
Even more than more charging stations and greater range. You think it's
it's price differential, it's range, it's making sure I have charging everywhere. Let's take that on in a second. And it's that I don't have to sacrifice what I want my vehicle to look like for it to be an EV. But that price differential is huge. And right now, currently law provides for up to $7,500 incentives, but only for the first 250 vehicles sold by an automaker, which means that those automakers, including GM, that really sort of produced winning vehicles, no longer have it. So to say this will be in market for 10 years is really huge in terms of shifting adoption and changing that price differential and making more people willing to buy an EV. Another important thing is education. And as more people also realize how much cheaper owning an EV is, both in terms of your fuel cost and in terms of lower service needs and sort of just the ease of owning an EV, I think that will also really help when people aren't great necessarily at present discounted value calculations, and they can be myopic about cost, but if they really better understand the cost advantages of ownership and can think about that total ownership cost, that will help.
Well, it sounds like you feel like, I'm use a little economic jargon, the price elasticity here is pretty high for EVs, meaning it's quite sensitive to that subsidy and therefore the ultimate price that the consumer face.
Absolutely. And I mean, what's really stunning is our market research team does clinics with sort of consumer live events with EVs continuously. And quarter by quarter, we can see a move up. We're in this is making a hypothetical with some education about EVs and a hypothetical choice between a bunch of either internal combustion engine and EVs. They get to see a model of some sort that are comparable in their, roughly comparable in their size, class, and functionality, the percentage that goes EV. And it's happening across the spectrum. It's not just on smaller vehicles, it's on full-size pickups and large SUVs. People are really ever increasingly open to an EV, and those numbers go up. And just to give you some public statistics, though, surveys by Consumer Reports and Ipsos say that about 1/3 of drivers or potential buyers are ready to consider an EV today for their next purchase. And 70% say that they're expecting to buy an EV at some point or consider an EV at some point, even if not for their next purchase. And that 1/3 ready to consider today is triple what it was in 2018.
Hey, Ryan and Chris, do you guys own EVs or hybrids? You got,
No,
Chris,
I have a
he
10-year-old.
only drives high-end Italian cars. I don't think they've gotten to EV yet. Yeah, after he drinks his amaretto or whatever. And
You got a very nice vision of
well,
my
look at
lifestyle
him.
here.
Look at him. Ryan, are you driving an EV yet?
Not yet. Our next car, my wife wants to get an EV.
Yeah,
so that's
I
our
do
next
as well.
purchase.
Yeah.
Maybe a nice lyric for your wife. They're beautiful.
Which one, Elaine?
The lyric. It's our Cadillac crossover that's coming
That
to
sounds
market
cool.
later this year. It's gorgeous.
That sounds, I like the
I think your wife would like it, Ryan.
I like it.
You see how she sells? It's really,
I know, it's
very
unbelievable.
subtle. Like,
after this, I'm going to Google it. And,
Is that
look at-
right?
Yeah.
I'm definitely
That's the plan.
interested now.
Yeah,
That
I
was
know.
great. That was fantastic. Going back to that
What
one
about you,
question,
Mark?
though,
What about you, Mark?
that's my next car is going to be an EV for sure. I lease, but my next car is going to be an EV for sure.
So would it be a gas tax or an incentive, EV incentive that would push you over the edge there?
For me to buy?
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm either way at this point, I'm so
You're
nervous
indifferent.
about getting to net zero. I'm all in now. We got to do something.
No, we
Everyone's
don't
got to
need any-
contribute.
You don't need any incentive.
And my carbon footprint tends to be high. As you know, I have propane heaters on my back deck, so I can stay on my deck in the middle of January in suburban Philly. So I got to do something to offset my carbon footprint.
And if you have a house with a back deck and private parking, I mean, the convenience of an EV is just amazing. For our EV, we never go to the gas station. We plug in
That sounds
right
kind
at
of cool.
home every,
Yeah.
probably with our
Yeah.
mileage, like once a week. And you never need to go to the gas station. And we
But-
have solar panels, so we literally charge on the sunshine. We're like,
Oh,
it's
now
sunny
she's
today. Let's go
bragging.
charge.
I consider this to be bragging now. Like,
But you want to get to net zero?
Yeah,
I'm
right.
incentivizing you. I'm giving you more compelling reasoning.
You're absolutely right. Hey, but if I gave you $1 and I said you could only spend it on charging stations or a tax credit, which would it be?
I think the tax credit moves the consumer fastest, but
Interesting.
I think it's critical to have public charging infrastructure, and the 7.5 billion that's already been spent in the bipartisan infrastructure package is catalytic. So again, you and I have a single family home, but I spend most of my life in apartments. So for people who live in apartments and for highway charging, it's essential to have that charging so that 75% of new car buyers have an owned home with dedicated parking. But that percentage is going to decline as you get into used car buyers. And you want an EV for everyone. So first of all, on the highways, you want people to have the assurance that they can own one vehicle. It'll serve all their purposes, and there'll be fast charging available without a queue if they want to take that Thanksgiving road trip. And so it's essential to roll out DC fast charging on our highway corridors. USDOT is very focused on that, although ultimately it'll be on the states and local governments to actually put that charging in place. And then you need charging in the community for those people who can't charge at home or at work. Workplace charging can be very powerful as well. And you need that to be placed where people stop. So a fast charger at the grocery store. So while you're in the grocery store for 20 minutes, you can be charging your vehicle. So that's really critical to long-term widespread adoption.
Hey, I know we're taking a lot of your time, and I don't want to take too much more time, but I have 2 quick questions for you.
Okay.
First question: when am I going to be able to take a level 4 autonomous, taxi in Philadelphia? When's that going to happen, do you think?
So I don't know exactly when cruise automation plans to get there, but in San Francisco right now, our cruise automation f- partially owned sub, where we're the majority owner, they are letting employees are riding on the streets in driverless vehicles.
Are
No one
they?
at the wheel. There's some great videos that you can look up on that. And so it's a matter of when it gets to Philadelphia. But I think with that happening, it's in the handful of years away.
That's so
And
cool.
cities like, urban areas where there's high demand for vehicles is exactly where ride sharing, ride hailing, autonomous or otherwise is most efficient. So that's where it's coming first, to
Good.
those
I can't
downtown
wait.
areas.
Can't wait. Final question. A little glib, but you can tell me if I'm off the rails here. But you remember that old phrase, "As GM goes, so goes the U.S. economy." You remember that? Yeah, I think it was GM CEO circa 1960 or 55. Is that still the case? Do you think, Elaine? As GM goes, so goes the U.S. economy.
Look, the economy is very diverse, but GM is tied into virtually every market, between the inputs to our goods, the labor market, the importance of a vehicle as the second biggest expense any household will make. So very closely tied. Auto sales normally, when we're not having chip supply issues, are highly, highly pro-cyclical. And people have very tight emotional relationships with their vehicles.
Okay, so you're saying yes, it's still critical, and you're because you're chief economist at GM, and you were fantastic at selling GM cars. I think the economy's prospects are excellent. I think we're in pretty good shape here. Just saying. But we're going to be following you, and really this was fantastic. Really learned a lot. Gave me, particularly appreciate it because you gave me a lot of fodder in my discussions with Mr. Brisson and his auto forecast. But thank you so much for participating. Any last words? Any last pearls of wisdom, guys? Anything else you want to ask, Elaine? No. Okay.
Great to be here. Thanks for
This is
having
great.
me.
Thanks so much, Elaine. Hey,
Yeah, thank you.
I know I'm supposed to say something. Ryan, do you know what I'm supposed to say to end this?
At Mark Zandy.
Exactly. No, I think we would appreciate reviews. So, if you want to give us a review, and if you've got suggestions for topics for the future, please fire away. You can email us or go to economy.com, and there's a place there for you to tell us what you would like us to address. But we're looking for ideas, but happy to do that. Hey, thanks, Elaine. And thanks everyone. Take care. Till next week.